Okay, hey everyone. We're going to talk now about the different types of immunity that you have. And again, this is me pulling big picture stuff out of the textbook. And your immune system can be broken down into two types of immunity. You have your non-specific defenses, and then you have your specific defenses. So before we actually understand the actual, cell-on-cell combat that takes place in your body when you're under attack, so to speak, we need to understand some of the systems that are put in place. So I think I'm going to try doing it this way. It might be a little easier for me to write since I am right-handed. And I have my notes here. This is what I use when I lecture in face-to-face class. It's just like I'm face-to-face with you, isn't it? Except you're probably home in your PJs or something. So we have non-specific defenses. I'll move it in a second. And you'll learn that I'm the world's worst speller ever. So non-specific defenses. These are things like the inflammatory response. I'm going to switch to a darker color. Maybe it'll help you see. I got a glare from my windows here. So inflammatory response. Is that better? Kind of. We have things like fever. We have things like physical barriers. Phagocytes. Again, we're going to go through and define each of these and see how they are a non-specific defense. We have this immunological surveillance throughout our body. We also have interferons. And we have something called complement. So this inflammatory response is very slow to spread. So it's generally like a localized response that takes place. It helps to mobilize defenses. Mobilize defenses. And it increases, it provides a temporary repair, a temporary repair of whatever the issue is. A fever is caused by little cells, or little chemicals rather, called pyrogens, and that again is just elevated temperature system-wide. So it's a system-wide elevated temperature. You then have the physical barriers. Physical barriers are things like skin, our hair, right, our nails, our secretions. As you might recall, last semester learning about the integumentary system, all of our secretions, the oil and the sweat, they all contain lysozymes in it, or IgA antibodies to help provide immune protection. So all of our body secretions have some antimicrobial property to them, as well as all of our epithelial linings. So our digestive tract, right, reproductive tract, respiratory tract, all have specialized secretions and cells to help keep stuff out, keep the bad stuff out. They might contain phagocytes, which are macrophages and macrophages. As you can imagine, one's really big, one's really small, but what do? They're like the little Pac-Men of our body. They go around and they gobble things up. I'm just going to angle this. There we go, a little better. For immunological surveillance, these are those natural killer cells. Right, we talked about them last time. Those are the cells that go through, fight virus-infected cells or cancer cells. They're on their own. They don't call any other troops into action, so to speak, but they're just out there kind of on patrol, so to speak, or surveillance. Right? They basically can attack the cell membrane. They're little chemicals called perforins. P-E-R-F-O-R-I-N-S, perforins. They attack the cell membrane, basically by punching little holes or perforating, right? Perforins, perforating the cell membrane of the invading or of the infected cell. We have interferons. Interferons are basically cytokines, and these cytokines are little cell-to-cell messengers, and we have three types. You have alpha, just trying to make sure you can see. Alpha interferons. Alpha interferons, it looks like a little sideways fish thing. These stimulate natural killer cells. Again, little cell-to-cell messengers saying, hey, my neighbor here is a little funky, maybe we should get a natural killer cell in to check them out. We also have beta. That's just the Greek letter beta. Beta cells, these are there to slow the inflammatory process, or slow inflammation. And what that's going to do is it's going to allow for new cells to come into the area and for inflammation not to take over the whole body. So it's kind of a little cross-checking mechanism. And then you have gamma cells, and these are the ones that are going to stimulate the macrophages, stimulate those phagocytes to come in and gobble up any cells that have been digested by the natural killer cells, right? All the debris that's left around. Those macrophages come and gobble it up. In our complement, there's a couple different pathways that take place, in your book does a good job of describing, and I'll point out your book in a little bit. But you basically have what you call the alternative pathway, and you have what's called the classical pathway. And what actually happens is it's like a chain reaction. It's a this happens and this happens and this happens and this happens, and you don't have to know all of those little bits and pieces. But ultimately, it's a bunch of plasma factors and cell-to-cell messengers. So in the alternative pathway, you have plasma, what are we going to call them? Plasma factors. These are just little things that are floating around in your blood. Plasma factors. Ultimately, what do those plasma factors do? They activate a little messenger called C3b. C3b. And guess what? Our classical pathway does the same thing. Basically, it's another chain reaction where the antigen is bound, and it all leads to a chain reaction to activate C3b. So one's caused by plasma factors, one's caused by binding to the antigen. Just different routes. Either way, what happens after this C3b is activated, and I'm going to draw it down here because I have more room, is the plasma membrane is destroyed. Again, this is the plasma membrane of the infected cell. So remember, viruses and bacteria come in and they infect cells. So the plasma membrane is destroyed, and then we have the phagocytosis that occurs. And histamine is released. And histamine is going to stimulate that inflammatory response to say, hey, there was just something really bad happening over here. We need to increase the blood flow. We need to increase the temperature, kill anything else that might be trying to hide out, and flush out all the gunk, take it to the lymph so lymph can filter it. Right? So that's what the histamine is going to do. So that's the non-specific defenses. Kind of zoom in for you so you can check my writing on all of these things. And you can always pause the video if you need to. Woo, there we go. Woo, perfect. Okay, so now we're going to do the specific immunity. I'll erase this real quick. So it was all of our non-specific things. And what is meant by non-specific is these are things, it doesn't matter what it is that's coming in or is disease. This could be the cancer cell, this could be a virus-infected cell, this could be a bacteria cell. Doesn't matter. All of those non-specific things are going to respond in the same way no matter what thing it is. In our specific immunity, we really have two forms of defense, I guess you would say. We have innate, and we have adaptive. So this innate immunity is something that you're born with, something that can't be taken away from you unless you have some type of immunodeficiency disorder. This is something like you can't get parvo, or you can't get kennel cough, right? You can't get feline HIV, FID, because our cells don't respond to those viruses that are in those animals, right? Now, we've all seen with things like the swine flu that viruses can mutate and then humans can get them, which that's a very huge possibility. However, innate immunity is not allowing our immune system or our cells to be attacked by those completely foreign things, like diseases that typically affect cats and dogs. So you don't get dog viruses, right? You don't get cat viruses here. For adaptive immunity, this is something where you're going to have to create antibodies. So adaptive immunity can be active and it can be passive. Active immunity can be natural or artificial. A natural active adaptive immunity, right? Natural active adaptive immunity would be something like you're exposed to a particular cold virus, and therefore when you're exposed to it again, your body has those memory T cells and you won't be affected by it. So this is going to happen after an exposure. It's going to protect you after you've been exposed to that particular antigen. Artificial would be after you've been exposed through a vaccine, right? So it's the same idea. You're putting those antigens into your body, but it's not in a natural process, right? You're going to the doctor and getting injected with the vaccine, right? It's been manufactured or whatever. With passive immunity, you have active as well, and artificial. I'm sorry, why did I say active? Natural. Natural and artificial. Natural passive immunity, natural passive adaptive immunity would be something like receiving the IgA antibodies from breast milk as a baby. When babies are born, the mother's body naturally produces milk, and that milk is meant to provide all the nutrients that baby needs. It doesn't only provide nutrients, it provides antibodies. Typically, in a household that has, a family with maybe school-age kids and then a nursing infant, that nursing infant is going to be the healthiest person in that household because they're getting the IgA antibodies from the mother. Now the mother's going to be exhausted and depleted from all the stress and whatever else. So the mother might be getting sick, but the baby's more than likely going to be healthy because it's receiving those special antibodies from the mother's breast milk. So it's an extra form of protection. With artificial passive adaptive immunity, what you're doing here is you're actually injecting antibodies. So you're not letting your body create the antibodies that you're doing over here. You're actually injecting the antibodies into the person. So injecting, and there's a couple instances like this. For instance, rabies, right? You go outside and you're bit by a rabid raccoon. So you go to the doctor, you're like, hey, I was just bit by this rabid raccoon, and they're going to say, okay, we're going to give you a series of antibody injections. And that's exactly what they do. They give you the antibodies. And if you've ever had rabies injections, you know that it's a series. You can't just go like a vaccine and one and done, or in some cases it's two and done with a vaccine. You actually might have to go in for 3, 4, or maybe even 5 antibody injections in the case of rabies because your body's not actively making those antibodies, so you have to get kind of follow-ups to get the extra antibodies. So that's specific and non-specific defenses. We'll continue in the next video.